Yeah, Nick Bennett tonight and Charles Tarbey. Welcome to the studio. Always good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Nick. Good to see you too. Hope you had a great break.
I did, thank you. It was a unique break. I did a lot of camping in dry creek beds east of Alice Springs, so some extraordinary territory. This is such a big country that we live in, and it's not until you get out to the fair income outback that you realise you've got to drive 2 days to get anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like an hour, it's a day from Alice Springs heading south to Coober Pedy, and then another day from Coober Pedy into Adelaide.
I have never driven that far, but I did catch a flight to Central Australia and drove a little bit there. But the biggest trip I did across Australia was on the train with my son. A very, very interesting exercise. It was back a few years ago, and the videos you see about it then, going back then, didn't quite create, reality and perception again were two different things. And I remember looking for a video to watch there. My son, all we could find was a video about the train. Yeah. And then there was a video about the ocean, and we're in the middle of the desert, and they were the only two videos that were available on the train at the time. So
sometimes the videos don't do it justice, you know.
They didn't, but you know what, Nick? I ended up spending some really, really good time with my son, and when you're sitting down and there's nothing else distracting you, you start to learn a bit more.
You got to talk to each other.
Yeah.
13 12 83 is our number tonight, or you can email Charles feedback@talkinglifestyle.com.au. If you've got any questions about property, we've come into a fairly new financial year. It's still new to me. I missed the turn of it. I was in the desert, probably a good thing. But 10th of July, so maybe you're considering how to reinvest in property as we move forward. 13 12 83. Coming up tonight, Charles, we'll go around the grounds as we like to do. We'll head out to Townsville in Queensland later, and also check into where I've just come from, Brighton in South Australia.
Yeah, two very different areas again, two very interesting markets, two very experienced real estate practitioners, long-standing in those regions.
And ahead of your appearance tonight on Sky News or Sky Business, right, with Tom Panos.
I'm a bit worried about that. I was saying I'm hosting.
You'll be right, mate.
And well, last time they didn't have a host. They raced outside to get me, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I sat down, and because I'm short, they have to put my seat very high. And when I went to reach for the auto cue pedal, it sort of slipped away, and so I had to ad-lib for quite some time. So I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about tonight's show.
You'll be fine, mate. That's at 9 o'clock. Is it?
It is, yeah.
Fantastic. So Tom Panos is joining you on that show and this show later. So we'll go around the grounds and find out what happened at the auctions from the backyard perspective that Tom brings. You got a website as well we should mention as well, propertyfasttrack.century21.com.au. A good place to go if you want to be geared up on what you need to know about selling your home, or maybe buying your next one, or getting into the business of building a property portfolio, perhaps, Charles.
Well, I think that's about the best thing one could do. I mean, you don't have to get too deep into property portfolios. Nick, some people get obsessed by it, and I see people trying to, if I dare say it, a little bit greedy, and sometimes they bury themselves in the process. I think investing in property is a great thing, but I think you should take your time with it. And recognise that at the end of the day, there's only so much money you can spend in a good quality lifestyle. And I really do concern myself with some people that buy 2, 3, 4, 5 very quick, or talk about how many of them they've got. Yeah. I think it is a long process, and it should remain that way.
It's a long game, isn't it?
Yes,
so, look, a good tie into this one. Not everyone's making a mozza on the property market.
No.
Where are the losses coming from? You've stumbled across, or I think you've actually intentionally come in with some pretty excellent data today.
Well, there's lots of great data out there, and my very good friends at CoreLogic are always providing me with data as it happens, and often before it does. And they talked about prices across Australia dropping in May. They did drop in May, but what we knew was that could have been seasonal. And of course, June, bang, they bounced back up again. And if you look year on year for Sydney, it's still up 0.8% on the quarter, but year on year, it's up 12.2% still. Wow. And Melbourne, 13.7%. So when you think about it, in Melbourne itself, it was the best performing for the quarter at 1.5%. Yeah. It's just astonishing, and the auction clearance rates are just as strong this week. So even though it's tough, even though it's hard work out there, the market certainly is changing. But when you look at some of these stats,
So we're talking financial year on year here, right? Growth in Sydney of 12.2%. Melbourne, as you say, 13.7%, leads the pack. Brisbane 2%, Adelaide pretty healthy at 2.4%, but pulling back in Perth, minus 1.7%. Hobart, though, good, 6.8%.
Yeah, and I think when you look at them all, the worst performing capital city has been Darwin itself. And look, it's mostly impacted by mining. It's also really, it's becoming more of Asia, more a part of Asia, really, when you think about it, than it is in Australia. But it's been quite devastated, and you'll notice that as you move through it, and you look at the percentage of people, 9.6% of people who sold their property in the first quarter of this year actually sold at a loss. Now, of course, that does mean that 90+% sold at a profit.
As you'd hope, but you'd often, that's a big number, that nearly 10% sellers took a dump. That's big.
And that's right, and it depends on the timing, on the issue, on the timing, but if we really think about it, a lot of those would have been around the mining areas, and I think they were great risk going in, and of course, coming back out, there you are on the other side.
Now, Hobart's pretty healthy.
Yeah, I like the look of Hobart, and when I look at the chart of if I was to compare Perth and Hobart and Darwin and Canberra as four out of the mainstream Sydney, Melbourne markets, Brisbane markets we talk about a lot, you'll notice that the Darwin market has had almost 35+% of properties that were sold at a loss.
Gee.
And that's why you see such a big number of 10%. And people think that Brisbane is moving along strongly as well, but it didn't perform as well as some of the other capital cities. But when you look at the overall charts on those four cities, you find that Darwin and Perth, obviously, again, back to mining, Perth is close to 25% of people that have lost. But capital cities performing very well out of those two. Here we go. Hobart, Canberra.
Canberra at 9.6% growth,
because we talk about Canberra a lot, and we've been talking a lot about Hobart of recent times, how the prices have moved for Hobart upwards, and we also can see that the yield in Hobart is much better, obviously because the prices are lower.
Yeah.
But still, nonetheless, Hobart and Canberra, these are areas we've talked about a significant number of times over the last a few months on the show, Nick, and I think that's starting to come through. We're still two very strong areas to invest in.
I think plenty of good employment prospects in Canberra from what I hear. I believe that the average income there is about $1,000 a week.
Oh, well, it's certainly higher than the Australian average.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. And of course, as you know, the security in government roles, it's very, very hard to lose your job in a government role. And you can get transferred and you can come back and your position can still be there, especially when you look at teaching. My daughter's married to a teacher and he struggles with the fact that he's been part-timing for many, many years. And when he goes to apply for a full-time job, which he did recently, there was one there, but it was occupied by a lady who went on maternity leave. She came back and decided that maybe she might not take that role, so it was still left available for her. So there's that period of time where people have to wait. I think that's fantastic for her. Sure. But when you look down the path, it impacts on others. So if you do have a good government job, I'd suggest that you do your best to keep it.
13 12 83. Charles Tarbey's here tonight. Property Fast Track. Give us a call if we can help you out. Just quickly back to Darwin before we close on this particular set of statistics. I wonder, the cost of building in Darwin is bigger than probably any other capital city in Australia. So I wonder how that impacts upon gross returns.
Yeah, I think that it does definitely, but you've got to also remember that the labour workforce there might be a little bit easier to bring to play when you're building something. Okay. I also think that there's a lot of migration, again, from Southeast Asia into those areas, and it does significantly help. But, as I mentioned, Darwin and Perth are, well, especially Perth, very isolated city, very hard to work out. But there's an interesting thing there with Perth because one of our offices there is absolutely booming in a very, very tough market. So there are a number of markets within the Perth market itself. So not all of them are struggling, just a handful of them are really battling.
Just finally, what's rent movement like across Australia currently? It's
not too bad at all. The rent was down. It was a negative 0.23% this week over last week. Not a big change. The best performing capital city was Adelaide at 5.4%. And Hobart went back a little bit. It's had a very, very good run, but Darwin was the worst performer at negative 1.16% in terms of its rent, down over this week, last week, same the week before. So that area is is being impacted probably more heavily than any other capital city at the moment.
A story tonight, Charles, from Jim Marlowe, who's a property reporter. Chinese investment in Australian property could fall as much as $16 billion in 2017. What do you make of that? The claim is that Chinese buyers have turned off the Oz investment property market, with 43% of Chinese agents surveyed by Investorist saying they'd stop selling Australian property to their clients.
And this was always the danger. We talked about this too. I was always concerned that people were worried about the Chinese investors. Yes, they certainly came out here because of the safety, because of the pricing, because of the security, because of the investment, because of the lifestyle. But we have done as much as we can to turn them away. And so what you end up having now is they're going to go elsewhere, and US is where they're going to go. The market's moving very nicely in the US.
Yep.
So they're going to go there, and we're going to lose them. And then all of a sudden people are going to start saying, well, gee, we've got projects that are half finished that can't be sold, because we talked about the oversupply of possibly of apartments coming on. And it's been caused because I think we have put way too much pressure on overseas buyers when they're coming into Australia.
Okay. Now, how often do you get a Porsche thrown in when you purchase a property? Here's a quirky story before we go to the break. This is a bit unusual, isn't it?
It's a very unusual story.
Yeah, I like this one. A free Porsche with purchase of a North Queensland beachfront retreat. I'm liking that. Barrister Warren Lee, the chairman of Australian Mortgage Fund, is parting with his second home and his Porsche Cayenne, I think you say. I can't afford one. Which he bought specifically to get around North Queensland.
Well, the first house I ever sold had a car along with it.
Really?
Not quite the same as this. It was in Hunter Street, Emu Plains.
Yeah.
And it with it actually came a Hillman Hunter as well.
Oh,
it was a 3-bedroom brick veneer home, fully furnished. The people going back to the UK, and they threw the car in and all the furniture in. And you're not going to believe this. This was in 1970. Oh God, it was terrible. 73, 74. 18,500. There you are. 3-bedroom brick home, fully furnished with a car.
Fantastic.
Not quite the same as this particular Porsche, but I guess sometimes people just don't really want to. I know if I was selling something and it was a holiday home, you really don't want to be moving furnishings and stuff. I'm not sure about the car though.
A quick get out, especially if it's a Porsche. 13 12 83 is the number tonight. Charles Tarbey here to take your calls on Property Fast Track. We've got Glenn from Brisbane. Good evening. How can we help you, Glenn?
Yeah, hello, Charles.
Hey, Glenn. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Good, thanks, Charles. Yeah, love your work with Chris Gray.
Oh, thank you very much. He's on holidays, lazy bugger. He's away. And I was just saying earlier, I've got to host a show and I can't reach the pedal, Glenn, so I'm really going to struggle tonight. At 9 o'clock tonight, you're going to watch me squirming in my chair trying to reach this pedal.
I will be, yeah. I bought 2 years ago, I bought an apartment, an older 2-bedroom apartment in a Brisbane suburb of Paddington.
Oh, wow. That's a great suburb to buy in.
Is it? Right. Yeah, I was just wondering about that with the all the talk of the oversupply which is going on in Brisbane, and, you know, how you think that may affect Paddington, even though I know that Paddington is not so much of the high-rise sort of suburb, but yeah.
It's not, and I think, Glenn, that's the biggest thing. The high-rise is going to be an issue, and people have been having a go at me about talking about this, especially a year ago when I started talking about it. It is going to be a problem, but if you're in an area where it's nice and strong, and Paddington is just one of those places right near the city, very similar to our Paddington here, albeit that the construction of properties is different, I think that sort of purchase in that area is not going to be impacted. When you look at the price of apartments dropping, and they have dropped particularly in Brisbane, they've separated from the housing side in that the apartments are falling more in price than the houses have fallen in price. You're going to find that that's going to be out of the cities moving in rather than from in the city moving out. And so from where you're based, Glenn, I think that's fantastic. I remember my father bought a property in Highgate Hill years ago, probably 30, 40 years ago, to build apartments. And that area there has taken off crazy. And there are people buying apartments in there. And the biggest concern, Glenn, is when the apartments are completed, will they be in a position themselves to complete the transaction? Because if valuations drop, and that's possible, the banks will put pressure on people to put more money in, or they'll make them sell and sell at a loss.
Because the apartment that I've bought hasn't really done a lot in 2 years. You know, if anything, it may have slipped back a little bit just for the time being. I was considering selling, but you think maybe it may be a good thing to hold.
I like the suburb, and I also think that the city of Brisbane, if it's a good quality apartment, I really couldn't tell unless you could send me the details. I'm happy to look at it for you at a later date, Glenn. But certainly, if it's in the area that I'm looking at and I particularly like, I'd hang on, because you're just going to lose the money, the stamp duty, the whole thing, and real estate is a long game, as we always say.
Thanks for your call, Glenn.
Thanks,
13
Glenn.
12 83. And that's the point, isn't it, you made earlier in the show, that it's a long game. You've got to hang in there to amortise all those big costs to get in.
It's a bugger, Nick, because people have bought properties and they're hoping to improve their lifestyles and so on, and all of a sudden there's, talk, and everybody pushed Brisbane, a lot of southeast Queensland especially.
Yeah.
But I think we've just got to hang in there. It's got to stay there, because there'll be some good buyers, and again that cycle will come back around and people will say, gee, I wish I was in. My daughter bought her first property at the top of a cycle. She's now done very well out of it, but she's had it for 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
If you freak out after 2 years and dump it,
just stay there.
You're not going to win. 13 12 83 is the number. Charles Tarbey's here tonight, and we are back in a moment talking about the increasing trend of more families in high-rise spaces. You know, there are some great advantages in being the world's largest real estate company. For a start, your Century 21 local office uses the best technology and knowledge base in the world. Combined with the fact that each office is independently owned and operated, your local Century 21 agent knows your city, your suburb, your town and your street. It also means Century 21 agents can offer a huge range of resources and experience, including information from over 300 offices around the country. It's no surprise, Century 21 is the fastest growing real estate brand in Australia. Buying, selling or looking for a new home to rent? Contact your local Century 21 office and find out why they really are smarter, bolder, faster. That's just you, Charles.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, visit century21.com.au. Charles Tarbey here tonight.
Sorry, did I really say thank you to that?
13 12 83 is the number. Now, in the past decade, the number of families living in high-rise apartment blocks has more than doubled. In Melbourne, for example, there are nearly 12,000 families living in an apartment block 4 stories or higher. Nationally, there are 6% of families now in high-rise blocks. It's a long way from the quarter-acre block, isn't it? So how do they do it, and do we have everything in place to accommodate this trend? Carolyn Whitzman is a professor in urban planning at the University of Melbourne. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
That's good.
Thanks.
Now, tell us about this trend, Carolyn. What sparked it?
Well, I think it would have been predictable, really, when redevelopment started happening in central Melbourne. There was this notion that somehow Melbourne was going to be different from Sydney or different from New York or from Paris or London or any other large city, and that all kinds of people wouldn't be attracted to living close to employment, close to services, etc. So in the early, 15 years ago, in the early part of this century, developers and planners thought that it would be only dual income, no kids, or empty nesters who'd be living in the apartments that were being built. But even then, as I say, they could have looked at other cities and not been terribly surprised that there are a new generation of families who either get together before they have children and want to stay in the area that they've been living, or people who are simply attracted to bring up children with, as I say, access to the vibrancy of the central city.
Carolyn, Charles here. I think it's taken a big circle, full circle, because going back in my junior years, it wasn't uncommon for families to live in apartments, but especially when they moved into Sydney and migrants, they certainly did take on apartments and crowded them. When you look at it now, what design factors need to be considered when building family-friendly apartments from your point of view?
Well, that's a really good question. There's actually been a lot of good work done in that since the early 90s, for instance, by the City of Vancouver. The three considerations are at the unit level. There needs to be adequate storage space. If you think of young children, they have tricycles, they have prams, they have playpens, they have a lot of kit that comes with young kids. So the units themselves need to have adequate storage. The second consideration is at the building level, and particularly if you're not going to have individual backyards. Courtyard housing has occurred in the early stages of the South Bank development are a good idea. Just having playgrounds or play spaces close to the building itself is a good idea. And then at this precinct level, you need to start thinking about childcare centres and schools, libraries, and parks.
So, Carolyn, they're all fairly new-ish considerations, aren't they? So I wonder, it hasn't always been viable for families to live in apartments, I wouldn't think. Not that comfortably anyhow, but it sounds like these days it's a whole lot more appealing, a whole lot more achievable.
I was speaking to a developer today who brought up 2 children in an apartment building that he himself had built. So you're right that it wasn't considered normal or good in Melbourne for a while to bring kids up in apartments. Having said that, I grew up in an apartment in Montreal, Canada, and had a perfectly healthy childhood with walking to school and playing in the neighborhood, etc. So it's not abnormal for a lot of cities to bring up children in flats. Again, in Paris, it would be a matter of course.
Normal, yes, it would be.
It's a matter of Melbourne coming around to that.
I do know of a developer that has started thinking along these lines probably about a year ago, Carolyn, bought a significant number of developments not far from the Sydney airport and is building mainly 2 to 4 bedroom apartments instead of the old 1 to 2, catering for larger families, expecting that that's going to be the case. So there are developers out there that have been thinking ahead with this, which is fantastic.
And do keep in mind that the earlier generation of public housing was generally built for families. I'm not saying it's an exemplar of great design, but it's not unique to be considering the needs of children as you design apartments. I should mention, just to go back to design considerations, that noise attenuation, of course, is a very important issue.
Is it? So how is that being handled? How are we handling noise in apartments when, obviously, you want life to continue and you don't want to continually tell the kids to be quiet?
Exactly. So I think that a lot of the things that you think about when you're thinking about good design for children is actually good design for anyone. There's been a lot of complaints in apartments in cities like Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane about noise from licensed venues getting into the apartments. Again, you have to think about how, and there are, good building technologies that allow you to do so, to have noise proofing at a really high level, because that's a very common complaint from apartment dwellers, and not only apartment dwellers who have children.
Well, the hard one, of course, Carolyn, is flooring, and that's become a bit of an issue in some areas. Again, I know with my daughter now where she's living, she's got an apartment above her with timber floors, and that's all they hear all day long and all night long.
Clip, plop in the high heels.
Yes, yeah.
But a lot of that comes down to the body corporate, though, doesn't it?
It should do, but again, it's pretty hard for them to stop somebody from doing that,
So, Carolyn, some fairly interesting statistics here. 6% of families now in high-rise blocks across Australia. Just to wrap up, are you seeing this trend continuing?
Absolutely. I think that more and more it's considered a virtue and attraction to live with access to public transport, with access to lots of employment opportunities, and it's just a matter of developers seeing that market and responding to it. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more family-friendly apartments in both the inner and the middle suburbs.
All right, we watch that space. Carolyn Whitzman, who's Professor in Urban Planning for the University of Melbourne. Thanks for your time tonight, Carolyn.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
See ya. Property Fast Track, 13 12 83. Charles Tarbey here tonight. Nick Bennett with you as well. And you can contact Charles on that number, 13 12 83, or email by clicking feedback@talkinglifestyle.com.au. Ahead, we'll go around the grounds and check out how things are moving in Townsville and Brighton. 13 12 83. We were talking to Carolyn Whitzman just before the break about what you have got to consider when it comes to soundproofing apartments. And Gary's called in. Hello, Gary.
Hello, how are you?
Good, mate. How can you tell us about successfully living with timber floors in apartments off the ground?
Well, I've got 2 units in the one block at Manly, and both are ground floor. and one I rent out and the other one I live in.
Ah.
Now, the one I live in, I've actually put timber floors in myself, but I put in acoustic underlay underneath.
Right.
You pay a little bit more, but you don't hear the clip-clop.
Oh, okay. So
But,
you put that down first and the board's on top of it.
Boards on top. Now, you pay a bit more for it, but it's worth it, and it's worth it even for the people inside. But above me, I have a timber floor, and it hasn't got any underlay. It's straight onto the concrete, and I had a problem, so I actually had the popcorn ceiling, and I lowered it by about 2 inches and put in some what they call permatim, a clipboard. It's like
Wow.
it's like a planking, but it's fireproof, and put in downlights and everything else, made it look like, and acoustic bats. But
Okay.
still, it doesn't
Yeah,
stop.
that's excellent, isn't it?
Belt on the floor, you know.
So you've soundproofed your ceiling to try and combat the raw boards above.
That's right, because
Yeah.
and really it shouldn't be me; it should be the people above.
Exactly,
Not on the body
Gary.
for it.
Exactly, Gary, and it's great when you could do it. Unfortunately, you've got tenants and so on; they can't afford to do that. That's a great idea, though. I'd love to get more information on what you use for the flooring.
That's Gary in Manly, Queensland. Thanks for your call, mate. 13 12
Thanks,
83.
Gary.
Property Fast Track tonight. Nick Bennett and Charles Tarbey with you. As we go around the grounds, thanks to Century 21's extensive national network, let's check in tonight to Townsville and Aaron Noon. G'day, Aaron.
Hey, Charles, how are you?
Oh, g'day. You're talking to me and Nick tonight. Aaron, how are you?
Oh, very, very good. With nice, comfortable 17 degrees tonight. So,
Beautiful.
We're freezing up here.
And a full moon. Full moon, Mr. Noon.
Oh, Mr. Moon, yes, it's your night tonight, Aaron. Aaron's a very well-established real estate practitioner up in Townsville, been there for a very, very long time. Aaron, why do you live there? This is a good way to start so people get a better idea. And not only why you live there, but how secure is it for you from an employment point of view if anybody wanted to buy there?
Well, firstly, I think Townsville provides probably the best winters around Australia, full stop. So we bring a lot of tourists into the area from your southern states. I've always loved sunshine during the summer months and the heat, and during the winter months we have like a ranging temperature between 12 as usually a consistent bottom for when it gets the coldest for about 3 weeks, and then right up till 27 degrees in the afternoon. So it makes it a very, very nice winter area. And summer, well, it's always exciting, so many things to do up here. And Townsville being the central hub, always felt there was potential in regards to investment over the last probably 20 years. And we've had our downgrade like everybody else has in regional areas. But
You didn't get that. You didn't get the downgrade as much as surrounding areas, though.
Yes and no. I think when the mining boom ended, we did affect us quite extensively. And right up probably to around about the last quarter, we felt it quite harshly here. But the last quarter has seen an increase provided the figures by Heron Todd White of a rise of 3%. So to us, that's probably the cusp of things recovery phase in Townsville.
You've had that growth, Aaron, which is fantastic. But some of the areas around you and even further north and northwest are still dropping, which is a pretty sad thing for a lot of people invested in those smaller mining towns.
Most definitely. I understand when it's talking about Collinsville and a few Middlemouth and a few other places like that. With the advent of hopefully Adani and the resurgence of coal, that should help all those centres in regards to getting a resurgence. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen over the next few years.
We've been talking a fair bit tonight about units. Let's start with those. What's the median price for a unit in Townsville, Aaron?
But depending on 2 to 3 bedrooms, if you're looking at 2 bedrooms and you're looking at the city centre, you're probably looking around about between your 220 to about 260,000. As you get into your 3 bedrooms, which makes it very, very affordable, and they're units that have been built over the last probably 5 to 10 years. And then you're looking at your 3 bedroom to 2 bathroom, 2 car accommodation units, up from around about 320,000 up to your 400.
And what kind of rental return would you get on those properties?
Generally speaking, you're probably looking right at this time, not taking body corpus into consideration, but you're probably looking around about a 5%, 5.5% return on a lot of those properties.
It's pretty healthy. It's
Yeah,
not bad.
very, very healthy. Aaron, what made you move all the way to Townsville?
I think it's always a growth potential. It's a central hub virtue of the north. So we have our own port here. It's always been a centre for commercial and industrial, and now it's starting to head towards a more tourism-based situation. It's always had a stable economy due to the armed forces. There's large armed forces contingent here, Air Force, Army, and also amphibious. So they are a strong part of Townsville's culture, and it's always helped with our economy, stabilising it to a degree. I think the increase of the mining boom over the last 10 to 15 years affected it. It was a rapid growth rate, but that also declined with the drop. But I believe there's a resurgence with 2 new mines just opening up out west. The Adani Carmichael project looks like it may be taken off. But there's other things looking to come to Townsville in regards to a large 1.6 billion battery manufacturing plant that a consortium from the Boston Energy and Innovation plans to open a lithium battery gigafactory here. An advent of a mega medical centre. There's also a private hospital, and the build of a casino in Townsville just injected hundreds of thousands in it. So there's things
a lot happening.
Wheels just starting to turn, and I believe we'll start stealing all the money from down south, especially from Sydney and Melbourne, hopefully.
Aaron Noon, thanks for sharing your wisdom on Townsville tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Wonderful to hear your voice again.
And if my memory serves me correctly, you'd know Dragons, April Sun in Cuba. I'm pretty sure that Todd Hunter wrote that song as he was travelling across on a boat from Townsville to Magnetic Island, which is just off the coast.
Well, you'd know that with your background.
You could Google it.
You'd know that.
Let's go across to Century 21 now, Brighton in South Australia with Jarrah Holmes. Hey, Jarrah, how are you?
G'day, mate. How you doing?
Well, thank you.
Good evening, Jarrah. Jarrah, again, is one of our top performers, just recently nominated for the Real Estate Business Awards as one of the leading agents across the country. So he knows what he's talking about too.
Good stuff. Tell us about why we should buy in Brighton, South Australia. I'm just off a plane last week from somewhere nearby there in Adelaide. It's a good spot, isn't it?
Great spot. What I would buy, Brighton, South Australia, older home, either just original or maybe semi-renovated, on the 700 to potentially up to maybe 900,000 square metre blocks in and around, as close to the water as you can get, really.
Yeah, because how far off the water is Brighton?
Well, we're right on it.
You're right on it. Okay.
We sell everything from absolute beachfront all the way back to probably a 5 to 10 minute walk.
And what's your starting point, price point?
You can buy in Brighton local area for that type of thing, house, maybe starting at kind of 450,000.
Gee. Okay.
And the Adelaide market has been performing better than the Brisbane market as well. When you look at the stats overall, although both markets are good, the Adelaide market has had very, very significantly high clearance rate in auctions for a long time. And have you been noticing that, Jarrah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Every auction we've had, I think I've literally been running at 100%.
Gee, that's good.
If we miss one on the day, it's usually cleaned up within 2 or 3 weeks after the auction.
Seems like something's going on in South Australia. I mean, I grew up there, haven't been back for many years, but when we drove back into it from the Port Augusta side, there's been a lot of development there. There was just these incredible wind farms, one after the other, hundreds of these great big dynamos on the hilltop. So there's been a lot of spend, a lot of money going into infrastructure in South Australia, I think, recently.
Yeah, I think there has, and also the addition of things like the brand new Adelaide Oval, the new hospital, the new, a lot of this type of stuff creates, in Adelaide, a lot of confidence that things are happening, and we are progressing going forward, and it's a good feeling in Adelaide, I can tell you that much.
If folks want to invest there, what are the vacancy rates like? Are things laying empty for long?
Yeah, because sales are up, and a lot of people are buying. Obviously, money's cheap. Vacancy rates and rental demands are ones that are a little bit lower at the moment. But again, they've always been traditionally ones that will just tick along and come back into fashion as things level out. And a growth in Adelaide, we've had, I think, 7 or 8% over the last couple of years, which has been great.
Well, Jarrah, look, you're party to that, my boy. You've had a wonderful, successful run there, you and your wife Trish, and now started a family. All the very, very, very best to you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us tonight.
Beautiful.
Cheers, mate. Jarrah Holmes from Century 21 in Brighton, South Australia. Property Fast Track tonight with Charles Tarbey. 13 12 83 is the number. Back with Tom Panos in a moment. Nick Bennett tonight and Charles Tarbey taking your calls on 13 12 83. Yes, it's school holidays mostly, meaning less traffic on the roads. Not only during peak hours, but also Saturdays as auctions are put on hold for folks who may be away. Let's catch up with Tom Panos. He knows what's going down. He's an auctioneer and a 2-decade veteran of the business, and he's on Property Fast Track tonight. Evening, Tom.
Good evening, Nick, and good evening, Charles.
Good evening, Tom. Good to hear your voice once again. No, I think people are going to start talking about you and I.
Yes. Charles,
spending way too much time together.
Dynamic duo.
We spend a lot of time together, Charles.
I know. And I haven't received a single thank you note from you. Tom, the auction clearance rates, pretty good again. Amazingly up on this time last week. They're slightly down on this time last year. But it's interesting how the market in Sydney and Melbourne is still moving along very nicely, particularly from the auction clearance rates. Did you have 100% out of 100?
I did.
You did? There you go.
8 out of 8. Well, congratulations. Big effort.
Thank you, and it has little to do with anyone else but myself.
Of course. Yep, we were talking about that before, about the fact that your modesty prevents you from telling us how good you really are, Tom.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. I have to say that I was fortunate enough to have a few properties that benefited from the stamp duty concessions.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, one of them was a unit that went for $595,000 in Alexandria, a one-bedroom unit, and I spoke to the buyer after the auction as she was signing the contract, and she said, it's a good free kick, this $25,000. It helped me pay a little bit more. And that's coming straight from a buyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think we're going to see similar kinds of things in other states? Melbourne, for example?
I think, in Victoria, and RP Data CoreLogic have put a report in today saying that they expect the same to happen in Victoria.
Yep.
But don't forget, Nick and Charles, prices are cheaper overall in Victoria, so there's not a lot of suburbs that are going to get that maximum benefit across in Sydney, more so in Melbourne. And I was, listening to your earlier comments before, Nick, where you said, yes, there is less traffic on the road.
Yeah.
But look, outside Eastern, Eastern suburbs is known, and a lot of these agents go off to Europe and have their holidays and their vendors that have kids that go to private schools. They do duck away for 3-4 weeks, and it does slow down in certain parts, but in other parts, I have to tell you, real estate agents have been busy working through the cold, and they're putting deals together. So I agree with Charles' sentiments. The market has still got blood flowing through the veins. It's not pumping at high speeds like before, but it's a strong, steady market.
Well, look, the numbers tell the story. 531 homes auctioned in Sydney over the weekend, but that was 100 more than the same weekend last year.
Yeah, well, there goes to show that the higher the increase of properties that get submitted, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to have a decline just simply through demand and supply and not through other economic conditions. So I think I'm beginning to feel very comfortable that this correction is not sharp, and I don't think we need to get parachutes out. It's a nice and steady climb.
We had a climb of 0.14% in properties advertised for sale this week over last week, Tom. We haven't had a climb for a few weeks, and that's a good thing also. And when you mentioned Melbourne, the median price in Melbourne is $675 as opposed to Sydney of $880. So people are going to get a chance down there. We just if we see more stock coming on down there, that's going to keep the market moving along very nicely. What we don't want, obviously, is we don't want interest rate reductions, which fueled the fire a few years back, and talk of interest rate increases is not a bad thing.
Absolutely. And I had a buyer of one of the properties that they bought at auction that tell me that they listen to the show every week.
Oh, good to hear. Now, mate, just finally, thank you very much, listener. Thank you, Tom.
It's our turn to send you a thank you note, Tom. Sorry, the wrong way around.
Just finally, mate, Brisbane was also solid over the weekend, a clearance rate up to nearly 58%. Do folks avoid buying in Queensland in winter because you can't tell how well the property deals with the heat of the rest of the year going to go?
No, Nick, what I'd say is Brisbane's really interesting because if you actually did a survey of agents, they will tell you that they roughly get an increase of another 10 to 15% the 7 days post-auction. So Queensland is being known for a long period of time that you can add 10% to the clearance rate the week after, because a lot of deals are put together with the highest bidder. It's not generally done on that Saturday, but usually by Monday, Tuesday, there's a bit of back and forth. I don't know, maybe Brisbane...
Tom, I think that's back to the good old days of real estate when you're talking like that.
Thanks for your time, Tom Panos, who joins us again next week, and we can catch you both, Tom Panos and Charles Tarbey, on Sky Business tonight. We'll be watching, gents.
Thank you, Nick.
Appreciate your time. See you next Monday, Charles.